So today, actually it was an amazing coincidence and to Chris's and Jonathan's presentation about onboarding. So I'm going to be doing the mobile checkout process. So it's kind of pretty awesome that these two coincide together because as soon as you take your user through your onboarding process and you get them into your app, what happens next? Well, you usually want them to do something in the app. Oftentimes, if you're working in, say, a consumer space, you mostly want to have them purchase something. You want them to actually go through, add something into a funnel, go through the funnel, check out the funnel, and boom, you're done. Sometimes with designers, the checkout process tends to be kind of a second thought. Maybe because from designers, when you come from like my background, where I actually had an art school background that kind of morphed into a design school, the kind of concept of commerce and capital is seen as a real negative. Now, there's good and bad things about both commerce and capital, but we have to acknowledge the fact that oftentimes capital and commerce is based out of trade, which has made actually the world go around. And honestly, as a designer, if you're working on business, oftentimes you're actually working with small businesses. And small businesses are mom and pop shops. So you're really helping a lot of diverse people actually succeed and being able to make a living outside of, say, working for somebody else. So there are a lot of positive things out of focusing on the checkout process. So I'll just jump in. So why mobile? And kind of actually going back to the previous slide. So the examples I'm going to show and go through and speak about are not dedicated solely to native apps. They're actually ideas and concepts that apply equally to responsive mobile web. One of the things that we've been recently seeing is that users are not just using native apps. Users are starting to move into responsive mobile web again. So as designers, we shouldn't be just thinking only mobile apps, also responsive mobile web. So why does this matter in mobile? Currently, 30% of all online shopping purchases happen on mobile. 30%, so there's a lot more room to grow. As mobile is being adopted across the globe and more people are feeling comfortable and native in mobile, the 30% number is going to grow. But you obviously can see mobile conversions are lower than desktop conversions. So mobile conversions are at 1.5% versus 4.4%. And I believe these are the US statistics. Global statistics are pretty similar. So obviously, mobile conversion isn't as high yet as desktop. There could be a couple different reasons. One reason is just people are not as comfortable yet booking on mobile. Second reason that us as designers, we haven't quite learned all the best practices of designing for mobile purchases. So this image comes from Luke W. He actually, as we go through this presentation, I'll be referring to some of his actual presentation. He actually wrote an article. I wrote it down on my hand. Drop-down should be the UI of last resort. So you'll see some of the really great examples he had that I pulled out. One of the problems that with design, initially when design started from desktop to mobile was like, hey, we have a booking flow. Can you just take that booking flow, make it smaller and squeeze it in to this smaller window? Simultaneously, what happened was a lot of conventions from desktop design got pushed into the mobile booking flow. So as you can actually see, there's a lot of stuff happening here. And then in Luke W's presentation is, how can you take this booking flow and condense it into this booking flow? So as you can kind of see, there are a lot less options going on here, and you have the same result at the end. So one of the ideas is initially, in order to be able to create a much better user experience, is by initially focusing on ease of use. on mobile. So really rethinking the kind of inputs, the UI elements that you have, not just thinking of I'll jump into that, but first think about the UI elements. So in Luke W's article, one of the things that he's really kind of nailed on and really focused on, and he's not the sole one, there's been a few other articles around this kind of concept of the drop-downs or really terrible UI elements on mobile. So as Luke W states, drop-downs impact conversions. And why is that? Why do the drop-downs impact conversions on mobile? First, it's a multi-step process. So here's our BART mobile real-time departures. And this is BART's actual mobile responsive web. It's actually a really great experience. But one kind of example it's a drop-down example is here. If you want to be able to select a station and your pickup station and the drop-off station, you have to actually go through 4 steps. So initially, you have to tap on this drop-down. And once you tap on this drop-down, you get this kind of roller ball down here. And as you can see in this roller bar, you only see 3 options. So say if you have 36 options, that's a lot of scrolling. You might make a mistake, tap the wrong one. So then you have to tap on that drop-down again, get that roller bar, click it. And then also in the BART's example is that after you click this, then you have to press select. So right here, in order to just choose one station, and sometimes when you're in the station, you're actually in a rush, you're stressed out, you don't want to miss the BART, so you're having to click through all these steps, you're going to have a high rate of error. So here, as I said here, oftentimes you have to rinse and repeat. So that's, what you're doing there is causing actually a lot of frustration. You're causing users to lose focus. So overall, drop-downs become a really bad pattern that are left over from our world of desktops. So what are appropriate inputs? So instead of using drop-downs, as we had in our previous example, you can use different types of inputs that can allow you to have the same amount of information, but in much more clear and accessible UI fashion. So first, you can have steppers. So steppers are pretty simple. So all steppers are is literally just minus and plus, and then it has the result here. So within a stepper, you can go tap, 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 and then you have your result right there. You can have sliders. So this is Airbnb. So you can imagine here, this range, the 10 through 1,000 range. Now, if you wanted to break that out into drop-downs, you'd have to have either multiple drop-downs, or you would have one drop-down that would have probably, depending how granular you want to get, an infinite roller bar in the bottom. But here, you're actually allowing the user to be able to set their min and max just through a simple UI that requires 1, 2 actions, and that's it. Additionally, you can have what are called radio controls and button groups. So really, all radio controls and button groups are just, so I don't mess this up, are checkboxes and radio buttons. So what radio buttons allow you to do is a single option. So you only want a user to pick one option, and that's it. So here is an example of radio groups. This is in the Yelp native app. And what you have here is just buttons. You can really just present them anyway. You can present them as buttons. You can present them as kind of like a tabbed interface. But the idea is you only allow the user to choose one action, one action, and do only one action on that. Simultaneously, you can have button groups with our multi-select. So you can allow the user to select multiple options. But with both options here, what's the power of them is that you're able to show multiple options simultaneously to the user and not hiding them behind drop-downs and forcing the user have to select through a bunch of drop-downs. So you're really making it much more easier user-friendly for your customer to go through in order to purchase. And really the idea is that you want to reduce as much friction as you can, and you want to make it as easy as possible in order to maintain trustworthiness within the flow. As you're kind of blocking out elements, you really kind of want to think about, it's common sense, really just be thinking about putting your information into logical chunks. So this is target, again, mobile responsive. So as you can see, these are just simple logical chunks that they break things into. So on the top, they have delivery. They allow you to log in here. That's its own action. Contact information into its own logical chunk there, and shipping address. What they have here is each logical chunk is also clearly delineated by a clear header with nice hierarchy also. So they can show they have a two-level hierarchy. So this is like a primary action if you want to take. These are your secondary actions, and they're clearly delineated by nice clear headers and with simple typography. You want to make forms easy to read, still within the checkout process. The checkout process tends to be still very form heavy. There's a lot of input you have to do. Ways to capture, user information such as names, address, still oftentimes gets input through forms, but you want to make that as easy as possible. So some of the best practices within form design is to clearly put the form label on top. So as you see here, this is Nike.com. So you have all the labels on top here. Instead of something like in this example, which I'm not sure what app this is, the form labels are inside the actual form fields. The reason that's not the best practice is, again, if you could click into here and you start typing, oftentimes what happens is the label disappears. If you're like me, half the time I already forget what I'm doing as I'm doing it, so I no longer know what I'm doing. So now I have to click out into a previous form field to remember what I just did. So again, this is kind of a very laborious practice that requires you to often take multiple steps. And again, this is kind of a nice design from Nike. Again, super clear as far as the headers are, really nice, simple, bold typography. Going back to the previous kind of discussion, one of the things that is kind of you will occasionally still find that's a leftover from the desktop era was that in desktops, oftentimes people will align form labels to the left, form field to the right of that. Still not one of the best practices in desktop. It's actually a really bad practice to carry over into mobile design. The sole reason is, as you can see, is if you have a long label, it's going to make the form field much smaller as far as your input space. Simultaneously, if you have super long labels, they're going to wrap, and then the name might be down here, your form's up here. It requires your user to do a lot of scanning up and down. It's not very clear. But the worst part about it here is, as you can see, if somebody is actually inputting information, you're actually cutting off their info. So even as this person, James Newman, was inputting in information here in their email address, after they input it, they no longer can see if they did it right. And then as they're inputting it again, they no longer can see if they're input it right. So you're really not building confidence in your checkout flow. And as a designer, you do want to ensure that you have confidence as the user is going through, because they're actually most likely going to want to put in money into your checkout flow. And confidence is really important as far as that is concerned. So there's actually kind of a new pattern that's emerging. It's kind of a mix of the two. Let me try to play it. I've heard both good and bad things about it. So here you can see. Oops. Sorry, I have my phone on. Okay. So what's happening is you initially have the title, And then as somebody is inputting information into it, it slides up. So it's kind of a nice hybrid where you can input your content and still have the label. The NN group, Norman Nielsen group, so I highly advise everyone to subscribe, go to their website, subscribe to their newsletters. They publish it every week. They put out a bunch of really amazing articles about UX design, everything from strategy to UI, tactics, desktop, everything. So what they say, their recommendation is to only use this pattern in case if you have a lot of inputs and you really are concerned about the amount of scrolling somebody has. So you want to kind of reduce the scroll by using this new pattern. That's a, I don't know.
How do we describe it? Like, how would you describe it so we know?
I call it the form labels that zoom to the top.
So what is the use case of this pattern?
So the use case with the pattern is, again, you're basically, it's input, but you want to condense for vertical space.
So you're entering a long line of information.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. So maybe maybe an example would be, instead of breaking out your checkout process into a multi-step process, you decide to condense it into a single screen. But in that single screen, the issue is that you have a very long vertical scroll. So a person has to do a lot of scrolling within that single screen. So you're concerned that with too many labels, so one of the, if we go back a couple steps, so if kind of this Nike example is, again, the power of having these very bold, clear labels is that they're super clear, but simultaneously they require a lot of vertical space. So if you have a checkout process that has multiple steps, this could require a lot of scrolling, and potentially you might have some abandonment because the user's thumb gets tired from scrolling too much. The zoom pattern. Yeah.
The what?
The form label zoom.
The food pattern. Okay.
The form label zoom.
We'll get it semantically approved by like middle of the week.
Yeah.
Set it up on Twitter.
So the question is, why are they bad? So it's still kind of not defined because they're fairly new, but the comment from NN group is that they can be distracting because there's an animation, and simultaneously, it's once the title zooms up, as you see in this example, the label becomes small again. So you're actually, so the NN group, their approach is a lot more through accessibility. So again, when you have the label that small, you have to think about accessibility, and you're not, creating a very accessible design. And like even speaking of my parents, when I actually watch them using on the phone, the amount of zoom that they have on it is pretty, it's pretty remarkable. So, so somebody that hasn't quite gotten there as far as knowing that they can zoom, or doesn't want to admit it, something like that is not very accessible to them. Okay. So, again, you want to leverage the native inputs. So out of the box, there are some positive stuff that come out of the box, some features. So a couple things that you want to do in order to streamline the process for a user is to allow native autofill to fill out appropriate fields. So something like here, where you click an email address, Safari will allow you to say, hey, do you want to autofill the contact? You want to make sure that kind of action is enabled, because the less input the user has to do, the easier you're making it for them. So you want to be able to allow them say, and this is in Target, hey, autofill my contact information, and then you can see that this starts actually populating on its own. So, instead of me having to go in and input everything, one by one, I can allow the native app or the native browser here to autofill all these fields for me. Again, you're streamlining my process. By streamlining it, again, you're enabling the user to feel more confident in the checkout process. There are a couple settings that are embedded as part of iOS Safari that need to be turned on. One is auto-capitalize. And, actually, you want to make sure auto-capitalize is enabled. So auto-capitalize comes here, like, say maybe you have name fields, like first name, last name. You want to just make it easier for the person once they put in their name that, the first letter is also always auto-capitalized, so they don't have to auto-capitalize it themselves. So one of the other things you want to do specifically is make sure autocorrect is disabled. As you can imagine, with my name, Lukasz Lysakowski, it's always misspelled. Unless I'm in Poland on a Polish keyboard. English, it's always wrong. So that's something you just, and you want to make sure to disable. Simultaneously on email addresses, people have a lot of different unique email addresses, and you want to make sure autocorrect is disabled. Same as on addresses, because there are a lot of different types of street addresses. So you don't want to input friction into the checkout process. Here, finally, I have support user accounts. Say if you're a bigger operator, merchant such as Target, you have user accounts. Maybe even somebody smaller, you have user accounts. You want to make sure that the user accounts are accessible within the checkout flow. So again, you're wanting to streamline that process. So if I say I sign in, this information can be auto-filled out for me. So I don't have to feel annoyed every single time I go to a purchase funnel and I have to fill out my information again and again and again. This is something that recent attention has been put into. So within form fields, you have two types of data, unformatted and formatted. Formatted text fields tend to come into play for fields where you're inputting numeric data. So numeric data, these examples are anything from phone numbers to dates, credit card numbers. So what you want to start doing is to kind of adding these concepts of input masks. So what you're doing is already pre-formatting the input structure for users. So as you see here, if you don't format, here's your phone number, here's your date, and then these are examples of different types of formatting for phone numbers, for dates, and then simultaneously for credit card number, serial number. One of the things that you have to keep in mind with input masks are that specifically even with phone numbers, addresses, and dates is international. So say if your checkout funnel touches customers that are outside of the United States, you have to first be able to allow the user to input from what country they're actually billing, booking from, so in order to allow them to be able to get a proper input mask. Specifically, you want to make sure you get dates right because the United States has a different date format from most of the rest of the world, and so that could be an easy way to make a mistake or create friction because if you're an international user, you don't know if this is a US or the rest of the globe here. So you want to make sure to be able to first capture from where in the world this person is booking from in order to properly input your input masks. Email prefill. So again, just offer a common list of emails. So I personally don't know how to do it, but work with your developer. These are things you say, hey, front-end engineer, app engineer. These are the things that really make sense. These things are going to make our checkout process and funnel much better and easier. So let's add these in and not make the person have to input their email again, because out of these examples here, the Gmail, Yahoo, yahoo.com, these are like your standard email addresses that most of the people you have will be inputting. Location. So like in the previous example, you could do something like this. This is kind of actually a bad example because it has the full address in one form. You usually, you have forms that break out the address. Let me see if we go back a few steps. We have it here. Yeah, this is a much better. So my former address, apartment number, zip code, city, maybe country, and sometimes there's even 3 levels of addresses you put in. That's again a lot of friction. There are ways to minimize that. So target allows you, when you go to the address area, it says, or select a store here, you can allow a person to say, hey, give me, I'll let you find where I am, press allow. That could be a way of actually finding your location. Oftentimes this is, again, much better where the address they put in is pretty close. Another example is this, where you actually implement adding in a Google search bar. So what's happening is you just have an address field, and then the user is putting in their address, and what Google is doing for you is using type ahead, and it's filling that out for you. Again, you would work with your engineer to plug this in. This is not hard to plug in. I don't know, but I'm assuming Google probably doesn't mind because they're probably getting information of where your address you're putting in, so they're mining that for themselves. But again, you're streamlining the process, and then right here you have 1 input field versus potentially 4. Okay, so as you can kind of tell, like this is a long, laborious process. So I've put my name in, I've put my address in, and now I'm finally gotten to the point where I'm putting in my credit card payment information. So this is actually a really super important area. So a couple things here that are really helpful and important to do. And again, this is Target. They do a really great job in their mobile checkout flow. So here, provide helpful tips. The idea of providing helpful tips is that you want to get ahead of your customer. You want to think of what are common questions, common thoughts the person has as they're entering in the funnel. So you might as well help them out. So here, within the target flow here, they already tell you what cards are accepted. So their red card, their Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover. You don't have to actually put the card in order to discover that, hey, we don't support it, because that's annoying. Simultaneously, as people are inputting the cards, what's kind of actually awesome with a lot of the cards, I believe the first 2 digits actually verify the type of card. So what you can do is, as people are inputting, you can display, hey, we know this is a Visa card. Again, you're building trust within the whole process, making the user feel more ease of use. Again, you can kind of see, okay, there's some bad things here compared to some of the previous things. Again, we have this kind of smaller label field. They kind of have a hybrid. Again, this is what they chose. Ideally, is the previous discussion, it would be better to have them bigger. But I can kind of see why they broke it out this way, because they have these headers here. So somebody decided, like, hey, these are better to have in a hierarchy. They could probably still took them out, put them up here. They would have been fine. Again, they are using input masks here. So let's get back. So one of the things that you want to do when somebody's inputting information, you want to make sure to be able to validate in real time. So maybe as somebody's inputting a card here, and your system already knows this card's not supported, you can actually start displaying an error here. You want to be able to get ahead of your customer and not behind and cause problems for them. And another thing to do is explain errors with common English. So again, this is important. A lot of frustration comes in if you say you have an error that says error 404 or error 300. What does that mean? A user never knows. Or say, hey, we have an error. Be able to provide actual helpful text to explain what the error is. And then finally, make sure that it's your site, your checkout flow is secure, so that it's built in HTTPS. Customers are becoming much more savvy about that, and they're looking for this green lock icon, which means that this is a secure checkout flow. So again, that's building trust and confidence in your checkout flow. At this time, I probably would never book on a site that didn't have one of those icons up there in the green text. Kind of an alternative idea to inputting the card. So as you can see here, this is still a manual process. You're having to type in your numbers here. There's this thing called Card.io. And I think this is only for mobile responsive web. It's essentially just a library that you can plug in. And what it allows you to do is, actually no, it works for both, mobile responsive and apps. So what it allows you to do is scan a debit credit card. So as you see this person's holding it up, it uses this the camera in your phone. It scans the front. And then what it does is it grabs the digits, and then you can input the rest of the numbers in here. So you flip the card, or you have it on the front, you put those in. Again, that's kind of an alternative way to kind of streamline the process of input. The way I've done it before is just make this as an additional alternative and not as mandated, because you can imagine there would be situations of, say, in dark or extremely bright light, that this input method might not work too well. One of the ideas for people, designers living on the edge, if you really want to be dangerous and streamline the input form, so you really only need to have this information on your input form. Your name on your user's name, credit card number, and expiration date. The reason sometimes you want more information, such as address, is that basically the more information you put in about the user, the less likely your the card number is not to fail in fraud checks. So the more input information you have, the more likely it will pass fraud checks. The less you have, not the less likely, but there are higher chances that the card might not pass through fraud checks. Offer alternate forms of payment. So another idea is to add PayPal. So check out with PayPal. There's still a lot of international users that use PayPal. So in this booking flow, you could just say, hey, I could go through here, input my credit card, or I can give you the option to check out with PayPal. PayPal has different kind of rates. They tend to have a little bit higher rates. So the rates, what they are is when you have, it's how much they take out of the purchase. PayPal tends to have a little bit more. But again, it's better to have PayPal without, if that costs you, if you have the option is PayPal or losing a booking, you probably would want to have PayPal. Some new technology that's coming into play now is Apple Pay. I was thinking of Android, but Apple Pay. So Apple Pay has been rolled out now, and it's slowly getting adoption. What's nice about Apple Pay is that even in this example here, you could have, check out with credit card, PayPal, or Apple Pay. And the user would just tap Apple Pay, and then they would come to this screen. And basically, they would just get a summary here. And then if you say pay, then you just keep your thumb on this thing here, on your biometric device, and then you check out. It's really nice and simple. And what's actually really nice, if it's integrated with your Apple Wallet, it actually has a lot of information already there for you, so you don't have to re-put that information in again. So this is Apple Pay. It's also starting to be rolled out onto desktop websites. So this is Warby Parker down here. And Warby Parker gives you the add to cart. And so add to cart will take you to the cart, and then you would do your credit card or PayPal. Or you say buy with Apple Pay. And when you click on buy with Apple Pay, what it does is actually it pops up the order on your phone. And in order for you to confirm the order, you just touch the bottom button there. And then that processes the order. And Android Pay, similar idea to Apple Pay. Again, this is a really nice example here. You have Android Pay, and then you have just your checkout. You can tap on Android Pay. It gives you this kind of confirmation screen. You say continue, which is your summary here, and then you just tap pay there. And Android Pay, as you can see here, examples, it's being rolled out to a lot of the bigger companies. So it's also a really strong alternative. So Stripe checkout, again, this is something you would work with your engineer to implement. So maybe, like in the previous examples I had, such as Nike and Target, they went through the process of saying, hey, we're going to build out our own purchase flow. This is going to be a Nike branded. This is our, it's a continuation of our brand, our identity. Maybe say if you're a smaller company or you're testing something out and you have a new idea, you don't have the time or the resources to actually build out your own purchase flow, you can use Stripe checkout. I personally haven't used Stripe checkout yet, but I've used it as a customer or as a consumer. And what I've seen about it is it's really easy to implement. It's actually really great as far as mobile. It's mobile native. And as you can see, they have a super streamlined, simple input. So they just have email, card number, your date, your CVC, and then you press pay, and that's it. It's really super simple. And they give you where you up there where it says, you have the little picture, that's your branding up there. But if you want to try something fast and easy, Stripe Checkout could be actually a really great solution for you. And simultaneously, it integrates really well with WordPress. There's already pre-existing, essentially like WordPress plugins that you can just plug Stripe Checkout with. The only thing with Stripe, you just have to create a separate Stripe account. Not that hard. So as you're moving people through the checkout process, as you saw on some of these previous screens, you have registration. Make registration optional. Don't make it required for two reasons. Maybe in your heart of hearts, you're thinking that registration is great. You want to have a person register. But somebody else might take it as a dark pattern. You might take it as you're forcing me to have to sign up. And simultaneously, a negative of that is that if I'm in the checkout flow, I'm about to purchase, now I have to register. You're throwing me into a whole nother flow, and you're risking losing the customer in the checkout flow. Now, if you decide not to follow those best practices, and you still want somebody to sign up for some reason in your checkout flow, give people multiple options. Don't just limit it to email and password. Reason is that people no longer want to create thousands of email and passwords for different services and apps. And you're also risking them repeating the same password they use for everything else. So you're actually risking some of their security and privacy by doing that. So the other thing that you can give is multiple actions to be able to sign in. So you can use such as Twitter, Google, Facebook, plug in those services, allow somebody to easily to be able to sign in with one of those additional services instead of creating a whole new email and password. Some other thoughts around mobile conversion. So question I have, should the full price, which includes taxes and fees, be displayed up front as you're looking at, say, a product, or at the end of the booking funnel? Any thoughts? End? Beginning? Okay. All right, so most people say beginning. And the reason most people say beginning, because as customers, we really want to know the full price. We want to know the full price at the very front, so we know as we're going through the booking flow, there's not going to be any surprises. So StubHub actually did this concept. They tested this concept, and they called it all-in pricing. So what they did is they had this test where you see this number here, where they did a test where they had the full price in the beginning. It was an A/B test, and what they found is within their A/B test that conversion dropped 20% in the test that had the full price in the beginning. So basically what that shows is that once users are going through the funnel and they've entered in all that information, it went through all those laborious steps, they're actually invested enough that when you have the taxes and fees at the end, unless you really spring a huge number on them, they will convert over anyway. So this is kind of an interesting thing from StubHub. I don't know, actually. That's a good question. That would be, so as you pointed out, so the question is, does shipping apply to this kind of model? So if shipping was, I guess your question would be shipping put in at the end or at the beginning? So yeah, I don't know, actually. That's a good question because as you pointed out with StubHub, they didn't have shipping. So they didn't have that as part of the experiment. But that's a good question. I would assume it would be similar where once you've gone through the process that adding the shipping at the end wouldn't be a burden. As you see, there's actually, say it's Amazon, you tend to have multiple shipping options. So you can have, hey, if somebody is more price conscious, they can have it slower, take more time to receive the package versus somebody that wants it more instantly, and they will pay a higher rate. So another thing to think about is abandoned bookings. So there's a statistic by Bayard Institute. Bayard Institute is, they basically have a website. If you Google Bayard Institute, they have a lot of really interesting examples of desktop, mobile checkout flows, a lot of numbers, and they do really deep use cases and research around booking flows. And what they find is that 69% of all e-commerce visitors abandon their booking. So really, if you're 69% of abandoned, there are different reasons that they abandoned. Maybe they had somebody came in, somebody distracted them and they forgot what they were doing. Maybe they didn't have a credit card on them. Maybe there was actually an error. Or they decided to go comparison shopping. So you really want to reach out to them again. And it tends to be found that email is a really good way. So you want to be able to send them an email. The kind of tactics there are different arguments about tactics, about how to do it. Overall, don't be pushy. And basically, contact them sooner than later. So initial contact should be within a few hours. And then another one a day or two later. Some people say do 2 contacts, some people say 3 contacts. You'll find all different types of information. But the idea is to reach out again, say, hey, come back and don't be pushy at all. Don't really, again, sound like too desperate about it. So the question is, what is the conversion rate on those emails? Again, the numbers on that are pretty broad. So I've seen everything from people quoting 10 to 25% conversions on those emails, which is still a good number. Yeah. So some other ideas that, again, checkout funnel. We don't have to think of the checkout funnel being just like, this is a single item, get them through. You can have the ideas of a shopping cart. So, everyone's kind of had a cart before. So you can add an item to a cart, allow the person to kind of create a single cart. But if you do support a cart, make sure you support the concept of being able to edit or remove items in the cart. Don't freeze the customer in the cart. Again, you really cause a lot of, just become annoying to your customer. Registries are a nice idea. Again, registries are nice where you could create a registry for other people to purchase. Again, the idea is don't think about just there's a single point of purchase and that's it. Think of alternate means of purchase, such as carts, registries, allow different forms of being able to find and buy. Finally, once a person goes through the purchase flow, provide a confirmation. This is actually, honestly, a huge tension point. People want to make sure that they receive the feedback that what they purchased is what they purchased, and don't be scared about having more details. Just repeat everything. You're just building confidence here. And again, as I was saying before, as designers, we oftentimes don't think in the concept of selling. I think designers tend to be kind of scared of the concept of upselling and selling, but don't be fearful of it. Add options to continue shopping so somebody can come back and shop more, or you can display more items that can be also purchased. So kind of now coming to the end, some kind of inspirations to look to. So Luke W. wrote this book. It's now about a decade old, but it's called Web Form Design. This is a really great kind of tutorial to designing with forms. Simultaneously, he has the article that I mentioned earlier about mobile design, about drop-downs. And again, it's called Drop-Down Should Be the UI of Last Resort. So again, I highly recommend everyone here to actually sign up to the DR podcast. They actually did an episode, and they probably were, Chris and Jonathan were sitting here, they probably were like, hey, this is everything we said in our podcast. We should just play our podcast instead of having you on the stage. But episode 21, Designing Credit Card Forms, ! Is a great one for people interested in this idea. Also, there is a website called Checkout Pages, checkoutpages.xyz. He tends to kind of actually focus a little bit more on desktop, but they're really great examples of really interesting and nice checkout pages. And also, as you can see, he's been adding to the checkout pages is pricing, product, and store pages. So really some more nice examples of basically product-based design. Again, this is Bayard Institute. Detailed analysis of e-commerce examples. Some of the examples are a little bit old, but it's really great analysis and details and data. And then here, finally, a resource for everyone to kind of plug into is a jQuery payment. So this is just a jQuery library, so it's a JavaScript library. So this would be primarily for mobile responsive web, not native apps. But what's really nice about it is it's already basically has, it's built for integrating into Stripe, and it follows a lot of the best practices already that I described. So instead of having to listen to me, you can just download this, plug this in, and then you can follow a lot of the best practices out of the box. And that's it. Question? Oh, she has.
So similar to the question I asked her earlier about alternative payments, when it comes to responsive web, what's the best practice for adding both Android and Apple and PayPal?
That's a good one. I don't know if you can do it, but maybe you could, I would assume you should be able to sniff out what kind of browser it is or what kind of platform. So you would say, hey, I know this is a iOS Safari browser, give them an Apple Pay button, versus like, hey, this is a Chrome browser on Android, give them an Android Pay button. But then you would leave PayPal always because that's universal between both. So I think that would probably be the way that would work. You're the front-end engineer, so I would say you might know better how to do that.
Yeah, use a plugin.
Plugin.
Plugin for browser protection because that should screw it.
Okay.
I have a question right here. Hi. Mobile responsive web has the little green lock icon in the URL bar. How can a native app elicit the same amount of security?
That's a good question. It's a very good question. What I've seen people do is they will have, again, a lock icon in the actual screen design, and they will have like, this is, whatever kind of bit encryption they actually offer. And I guess at that point, it just becomes trust. I think that's becoming more and more common. People are seeing that, and maybe initially, if it's a service that you don't know, maybe you wouldn't purchase from, but after a while, you would know that service is trustworthy.
A lot of the native apps have Apple Pay, I guess, integrated into it, so it's like you already kind of trust that your information is with Apple, right?
Correct.
So, but I haven't actually used Amazon Checkout on my phone before, so I'm not. But I would guess that a lot of they do a lot of standards, kind of. They do very simple design, so I would look at their design, maybe. So if you use a dark gray background around like kind of like a modal pop-up, right? Is that what you're saying?
So actually, I just want to ask about, the detailed UI part. Now, when you have stages in confirmation, like stage one, part 1, part 2, is it easier, is it better to show stages in like part 1 of 2, by numbers and figures rather than, they have those colored dots, because some of them are color blind or some are not able to. So which is a better practice to, show that your user's in this stage, and there are so many more stages?
So I think you partially answered your own question. So I think relying on color is dangerous because there are colorblind users. You have couple of different main color blindness. So if you're relying on color, you're actually specifically with male users, that's kind of getting into dangerous territory. And actually, I suffered with that a long time ago when I was working on the project, and the primary colors were red and green. And my project manager and I kept arguing about the color palettes. And then finally, after a while, he told me he was colorblind. I was like, that would have solved a lot of issues. And it also was a learning opportunity for me to say, you have to address this and think of alternate means. So a numeric order would be best. But simultaneously, if you're using numeric orders, people tend to click on them, so you probably want to make them interactive and not make them static.
Thank you, Lucas. Everybody give it up for Lucas. Also for Chris and Jonathan.